Hello, everybody, and welcome to this third webinar in the series of EU Supporting Nature Conservation. Today, we will start the webinar Carbon Stock Assessment. So we will be discussing both forest carbon and soil carbon. My name is Ruda Skoinja. I'm from Evenflow and ESA SEF project at the same time, and I will be your host today. Just a few housekeeping aspect. So this webinar will be recorded. All your questions, do not hesitate to share them in the chat. The presentations will be shared and there will be a question and answer session at the very end. And we will be using the Mentimeter. To start off, we'll start maybe with the first question of the Mentimeter that will be shared in a second. And you'll see, so we would like to know what is your overall experience with Earth observation-based tools, whether it's no experience, some experience, high, EO academic, or EO data service provider. You can join us through the menti.com using the code 75269146. And while you go start answering, that's great. We'll maybe quickly go back to the agenda and I'll present you the agenda at the same time. So indeed, we'll start with a very brief introduction about ESA SEF and Eurosite, because this webinar is brought to you by a collaboration, very fruitful one between these two entities, organizations, projects. We'll have a brief introduction on what is Earth observation for carbon, how it can be used, and then we'll go into two case studies, the forest carbon and the World Soils Project, and we'll finish with a panel discussion. Overall, 1 hour, and yeah, do not hesitate to be active to join us to discuss it, and yeah, let's move on then maybe to see again the audience. Great, I see that we have many people with no experience. That's really great. That is the aim of today, to bring everybody, let's say, introduce everybody what can be done and what can't be done. And with this, we can maybe move on then. You can still continue answering. Indeed, the very first speaker is Clive Harford from Eurosite. He has a strong biodiversity, botanist, biology background, but as well the technology background, because he's the chairman of the remote sensing group of Eurosite. So Clive, could you maybe then provide us an introduction on Eurosite and what you are doing?
Yes, I'm just waiting to take control of the screen. Okay, right. I just want to say a small amount about the background to Eurosite and to the remote sensing and biodiversity monitoring group of Eurosite. Initially, what does Eurosite stand for? Well, it provides opportunities for practitioners to network and exchange experience on practical site management. This is important essentially because it stops people reinventing the wheel. So with so many people working on the same projects, then or the same type of projects, particularly in the European perspective, the EU perspective, then communication is critical. Eurosite itself, well, it was established in 1989. It currently has 80 members from 26 countries. There's cooperation with the International Land Conservation Network, the European Landowners Organisation, and Natura 2000 Biogeographical Process, the ESA, European Space Agency, and Stakeholder Engagement Facility, to mention just a few. With regards to the Remote Sensing and Biodiversity Monitoring Working Group, this was established, first mooted in 2018 at a Natura 2000 monitoring workshop, and was approved in the work programme for Eurosite in 2019, just before the pandemic, basically. So lots of the things we had planned to happen straight away didn't for a few years. But the critical role for the for the working group is to facilitate information exchange between remote sensing technicians and land managers, and particularly those responsible for delivering biodiversity management and monitoring. I've lost control, I think, of the... there we are. The working group currently involves participants from 14 European countries, and we're looking to increase that. And other goals are to provide links to relevant online training videos, webinars, like this one now, manuals, articles and case studies on the Eurosite Resource Centre. Also to create the possibility for personal consultations as necessary, and to enable social network interactions through the Eurosite online media and events. The last thing I have to say really is that if you have any questions or either to do with Eurosite generally or to do with the Remote Sensing Biodiversity Monitoring Support Group, you can either contact myself, Clive Herford, or Wojtek Marusz at Eurosite using the email addresses on the screen. I think the presentations are being made available, so you don't need to scribble anything down now. Okay, thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say, really.
Thank you, Clive. Thanks a lot. Now I'll hand over to Phil Harwood, who's a senior consultant at Evenflow. He'll start with the ESA SEF presentation about the project, and then provide also an introduction on the topic of the day. The floor is yours, Phil.
Okay, thank you, Ute. So what is the Stakeholder Engagement Facility? Well, we are a project that has been set up by the European Space Agency. And the idea of the project is to make potential users aware of space-based solutions that might benefit them, and to provide them with practical support to get started. What that practical support could be, it could be just making connections, it could be organising webinars like this one, or training courses, or providing direct support. Really, we try to work with the target community, in this case, Eurosite and its members, to understand what they say is most relevant to them, and to try to implement it. The sort of problems that people come across are typically, we classify into them awareness, where people don't really know what could help them. Their acceptance, where people know that these things exist, but they need to get started. And then adoption, where people are, okay, now we're interested, we want to use these, but how practically do we get them started? How do we integrate them into their workflow? And we've listed some of the things here that we can do to support this. Not all of these are technical. Often the hardest challenge of all is convincing management that you want to spend some time on this. So within this context, what is today's webinar about? Well, we've been doing a series which aims to showcase a range of Earth observation-based solutions to a wide audience of conservation practitioners. It is intended as a first step. There will be follow-on. The more feedback we get from you during today, the better we can focus future efforts. So really, I cannot emphasize this enough. I want to make this a participatory webinar. So please put things in the Q&A, put things in the chat, but also during the discussion later. This isn't intended as a closed shop. You are welcome to stick up your hand at any time if you have something that you want to say in person, and we'll unmute you and you can contribute. So that was it. Now, so much for what the SEF is. Now let's turn to the topic of today, which is carbon measurement from space. And here is a graph of the global carbon budget. This is from 2023. And to nobody's particular surprise, you can see that there is a large amount of anthropogenic emissions coming from fossil fuels, industry, transport, whatever. And this is being offset to some degree from the land and from the ocean, but not by nearly enough. So a lot of people are trying to get a handle on this. They're looking at the fossil fuels, but we also want to understand more about what is the ocean doing, what is the land use change doing to the carbon emissions. This is a graph specifically about land emissions from the European Environment Agency, and it shows you the net change in carbon absorption or emissions, as the case may be, from different types of land use. This is within Europe, by the way, not worldwide. So yes, there is a net absorption, not nearly enough to offset emissions, but you can also see where this is coming from, with the biggest contribution by far coming from forests. And you can also see which countries there are really the focus here. Now, where obviously there's carbon sources on the one side, and then there's carbon sinks coming from land. So what's tended to happen is that there's been a variety of markets set up to try to relate one to the other. And there are typically two types of markets. There's a compliance market where there's a maximum total carbon emission that cannot go beyond, and maybe there is some trading between entities. But there are also voluntary markets, which are not legal, but are generally, there's some sort of regulatory body, a standards agency that oversees this. And the idea is simple, that in order to offset the carbon, I'm sure whenever you fly, you are asked if you want to pay to offset your carbon. Somebody receives that money in order to preserve an area or to implement best practice for carbon sequestration. In theory, this is all very straightforward. I mean, there are lots of concerns around double counting and greenwashing, and there's also some subtleties that maybe I'm not discussing here, but I think this is the overview of it. So far I have not mentioned space data. Where does space data come into this? Well, there is a huge number of satellites currently in orbit around the Earth. The ones I'm showing here are just the ones that have been developed by the European Space Agency. The ones in orange here are the weather satellites, the ones that you will get your weather forecast from. The ones in green on the inside are the scientific missions, which look at trying to understand the science behind in different aspects. So Aeolus looks at wind, biomass looks at biomass, EarthCare looks at aerosols in the atmosphere. All of these missions trying to understand the Earth system, but the carbon cycle as well. In the middle in blue, you have the European Community funded Sentinel satellites, which aim to give operational data, regular periodic data that we can use for more day-to-day measurements, or at least year-to-year measurements of the carbon cycle and of the changes in the Earth. What are we actually measuring here? Generally speaking, we have two types of satellites that we are most concerned with. They're not the only ones, but the most common ones. One is optical images. It's basically like taking a camera, but the difference is that you're looking not just at a single wavelength, but you're looking at how much you're getting back in different wavelengths from the Earth, from different pixels. And from this, you can build up quite a lot of information by looking at the different intensities in different wave bands of the optical spectrum, or even beyond the optical spectrum. The other one that is commonly used is synthetic aperture radar, where you are basically emitting a ping from your spacecraft and you're seeing what reflectance you get back from the surface. And that reflectance will differ according to whether you're looking at vegetation or buildings or water, but it will also differ, for example, for the type of vegetation. Bare trees will give you a different signal to healthy trees. So building up all of these, we can build up quite a lot of different global data sets. We can look at ocean temperatures, we can look at clouds, we can look at vegetation health, we can look at aerosols in the atmosphere, and so on. But then we also want to look a bit more globally, because we can also zoom in and look globally. This is an example in the Amazon rainforest where you can actually zoom in and look at where there has been deforestation. And this is an example that would be used, for example, to monitor whether some of these carbon markets that work in the Amazon are really doing what they claim to be doing. We can also go very locally as well. This is an example from the People Eco Schemes project. Those of you who were in the previous webinar would have seen this before, where they look at the soil organic carbon on a farm level. And then I should mention that, of course, as well as land, there's also a bit of a cross-check as well, because spacecraft are also used to check the actual carbon that they see in the air and see, is this consistent with the budgets that we are getting from building up the individual entries for land, for industrial emissions and so on. So that was a very quick overview of carbon from space. Today we're going to hear more about two very important topics. One is on forest carbon and one is on soil organic carbon. But I also want to stress this is not the only uses of Earth observation data. They're used for many other measurements of carbon stocks, including just looking at general land cover, key landscapes, agricultural practices, and let's not forget the marine ecosystems as well, the blue carbon, as well as I've just said, directly measurement of emissions to understand what it is that is being offset. So that was a very quick introduction. I hope not too quick. And now we will pass over to Yuka from VTT, who will now give us an example on forest carbon monitoring.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip. Let me try if I can control this. Yes, okay. So indeed, my name is Jukka Miettinen from VTT Finland, and we are coordinating this ESA-funded forest carbon monitoring project. So over the next 12 minutes, I will give you the brief outline of what we do and what are the main outcomes, particularly from the user perspective. Like I said, VTT is leading this, but we are not here alone. So at the bottom here, you can see quite a large consortium. This is overall, or it will be overall, a 3.5-year project. The consortium has varied slightly over the time, but this is the current consortium, and we have 1 more year to go in this project. And the overall aim of this project is to create a tool set for particularly EO-based forest structure, biomass, and carbon monitoring. Why EO-based? Well, Philip already gave a very good introduction of this topic, so I won't dwell very deeply into this now, but the key points of Earth observation is that we can get a holistic picture, wide areas covered in reasonably high resolution with transparent methods and detailed information. Naturally, it has limitations also, and I will come back to those soon. But yeah, the overall aim of this project is to provide a toolbox for users that would integrate EO data with existing in situ data, field measurements, or any field reference data sets. And the idea is that, or we believe that there is no one type of EO data set or no one particular method that would suit the purposes of all the users. So we aim to provide a set of different methods and tools that the users could then choose from depending on their conditions, what kind of data they have, what kind of requirements they have, how large is the area, and so on. And in addition to the mapping of the carbon stock as such, we also provide this process-based ecosystem modeling tools in this same package, which can be used, for example, to run some future forecasts under different climate scenarios and so on. And in the same concept also, we are now testing this kind of data assimilation approach, where we would combine modeling with EO observations in order to create like consistent time series of information, which is often very, very important while measuring forest carbon or any other forest parameters over time. And last but not least, key aspect is that we aim to provide for all of the products that come out of these tools, we aim to provide uncertainty metrics and uncertainty layers on the pixel level. Because at the end, only if the uncertainty of this information is known, they can be used in the legal or financial monitoring of forest carbon, for example. And to this, also the reference data, the field reference data, and the combination of the synergistic use of the EO data and the field reference data is extremely important. Currently, we have 3 tools available for forest structure variable mapping. On the top, we have this probability, which is a VTT in-house tool, and then we have K-nearest neighbor, which is a very widely used prediction method in forest for forest variables. And now we are developing this UNet approach, which is a deep learning approach. It's the convolutional neural network deep learning method. But the common thing for all of these 3 aspects is that with these 3 methods, we produce predictions on the forest structure. And this, while I was listening to the introduction, this alone already might be valuable for many of the users, for example, for biodiversity topics like the species proportions and so on. Nevertheless, if we are now interested in carbon, particularly, these forest structure then go as input into the PREBAS ecosystem modeling, and we get the biomass, above ground biomass, below ground biomass estimates, and if you are interested, also further estimates on carbon fluxes we get from this ecosystem modeling side. This is the, let's say, the main pipeline of the forest carbon platform. On the right-hand side, you can see also a mention of this biomassar method, which is developed by Gamma Remote Sensing, actually in another ESA project, this CCI biomass project. This approach has been used to create global biomass maps. And in this project, in our project, I mean, Gamma Remote Sensing is also in the consortium, and in this project, they have fine-tuned this approach for particularly European conditions and higher resolution. So we use the same biomassar approach, but produce 20-meter resolution carbon or biomass maps over Europe. So these are the 2 main pipelines that we have at the moment. And I just want to highlight that all of these tools, by the end of the project, they will be made available in this network of resources platform. We have already gathered quite a lot of information of using these tools on various purposes. We have over 10 different demonstration or use case demonstration sites in Europe and 2 in the tropics. In most of these demonstrations, we have used the openly available Sentinel-1 radar satellite and Sentinel-2 optical satellite, which are both, we have used both of them in 10-meter resolution. And the use cases have varied very widely from local interest areas like in Extremadura, we have only 1 Sentinel-2 site, a small area, to regional level like the Catalonia level and national level like Finland, and then to the European-wide mapping, which we are doing for JRC. And all of these demonstrations have had a particular user partner with whom we have developed these approaches and who have then evaluated the products as well and gave feedback. And all of these demonstrations have been run in the Forestry TEP processing platform. Some of them are already available, these methods that I mentioned, not all of them are available yet there, but there are many other products and sorry, not products, but processing services available as well. So I encourage you to have a look at this platform. You can also upload or insert your own scripts there and run your own processing scripts in this same platform as well. Okay, so what are the outputs? The outputs are basically most typically maps. And here, for example, above ground biomass and basal area. And we can produce these kinds of maps, in this case 10-meter resolution on a yearly basis, so you can quite nicely see the changes, which are highlighted in red here on the right-hand side with our change mapping approach. And you can do this kind of maps for large areas as well. One of our demonstration area was Catalonia, for example, and then we had Finland and the European-wide mapping, as I mentioned. So maps, beautiful maps as outputs, but of course the question is, are there any good? And like I mentioned, we have all of our products, we do accuracy assessment based on field data, and typically the bias of the predictions are very small, less than 4%, usually even less than that. So that means that for larger areas, large area monitoring, these kind of approaches are very suitable. However, note that there is typically a saturation issue, meaning that the high volume or high biomass is not detected well. And similarly, there may be an overestimation of young forests. So when I talk about the overall bias here, I mentioned that the overall estimation. If you are particularly interested, for example, in high volume forests or very young forests, then you have to be more careful with these EO products. When you go then into the very detailed level, on the plot level or stand level, then the errors are much higher, 20 to 60%. And also I want to note that there may be variation, inter-year variation in the data set. So these kind of aspects need to be taken into consideration as well. So in summary, I would say that these kind of approaches are very suitable for large area monitoring, but I wouldn't consider them yet very reliable for plot and stand level monitoring. Having said that, if you look at the top right corner images, you can see that although the absolute values on a very detailed level may not be so accurate, but you can very clearly see the patterns of the changes in a highly detailed level as well. Just a very brief notion of the UNet method that I already mentioned. We have very high hopes on this, and we are developing and at the moment, and it will be included in the tool set. The improvement compared to more traditional methods is very clear, and we can start to see much better correlation on the results, which means that also the small area estimation accuracy can be expected to improve in the near future. Okay, if you are interested in looking more into the products, you can visit our platform, the product portal, where you can see some examples of the products. We also have recently published this kind of information package, which is available under this web link. You can find a video and a brochure there. And of course, I'm always happy to tell if anybody has questions, so you can see my email at the lower right corner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jukka, for the great presentation. We'll definitely have some questions later on as well. You've done really, looks a very good work. If the audience has already maybe some first initial comments or questions, do not hesitate to put them while they're still fresh in the chat. We will gather everything together and answer at the very end. But with this, I will hand the floor over to Julia Yagu, who is a geographer and holds a PhD in remote sensing, working from GMB Aerospace, developing EO services for institutional clients governing environment, agriculture, and forestry carbon stock measurements. Julia, the floor is yours, and yeah, you will introduce the World Soils Project as well, funded by ESA. So looking forward to that presentation as well.
Hear me? Hold on.
Yes, yes, now we hear you well. Yes, thank you.
Okay. And also, if you could switch my camera, because I'm not able to
Is there an issue?
handle it.
We'll have some.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. And thank you to the SEF consortium as well for this opportunity. Also to present and to let people that users, stakeholders that perhaps are not so acquainted with the use of Earth observation, for you to know how we are using it massively today and for these applications. So now I'm going to move into this World Soils project, in which we have been since 2020, analyzing and setting up a system to be able to predict the soil organic carbon content in the upper soil, soil layer. And as my predecessors, I speak not for myself, but for this scientific team whose logos are at the bottom side of the screen. A tremendous scientific team. So I'm pleased to present the results. We just finished the project, but we will continue with some enhancements that I will let you know at the end. So I just wanted to go over a couple of key concepts which are key. We are talking, and the title speaks about soil carbon stocks. Okay. World Soils does not provide the final value of soil carbon stocks, because that would be the total carbon store in soil, both organic and inorganic. So we just focus on the organic. Why? And the soil organic carbon accounts for that part of organic compounds. Basically decompose plants and animals, leaves, roots, the macrobiota. And immediately the question tends to be then, can we figure out the actual carbon stocks? Because that's what the legal frame is asking for, and what the soil owners, property owners are more concerned on institutions. The institutions also that have to report on carbon stocks to the commission. So if we have the soil organic carbon, what is that good for? And can we eventually calculate the soil carbon stocks with it? So first of all, one of the key points of measuring the soil organic carbon is because that speaks about soil health, number one. And second, yes, we can calculate carbon stocks from soil organic carbon, but bearing in mind that we just have one factor of 4 that we need. We need to know the soil organic carbon content, the bulk density, the soil depth, and the amount of coarse fragments. So the fragments in soil larger than 2 millimeters. So And then I go back to my first words. Calculating soil organic carbon is a complex multi-factor equation because it has to handle many factors. And that's true for soil, and that's true for forest, as we just saw it from our previous speaker. So what have we done and how did we handle it in well soils? Then again, I want to stress that well soils is a pre-operational cloud system. So this is not something that we've done locally. It's already on the cloud, and it will be handed over also to the European Space Agency for predicting and monitoring the soil organic carbon across Europe. I will tell you now the level of detail at which we have been working. And all this is based in multi-temporal satellite data. So these predictions are provided and anybody can access to the results that are already online. And there you have the link to the browser. Later on, you will have these presentations, so you can just click and go to the browser and see for those areas and lands that you know well, the prediction obtained so far. Again, all the results have been just published last November, just 15 days ago in Geoderma. So there is a scientific sound paper, peer-reviewed, which you can also see the insights and the details. But then again, there are some questions, particularly normally coming from those of you, those stakeholders listening and here present today, that perhaps are not so acquainted with the use of satellite data. So how well can Earth observation measure that soil organic carbon and other soil properties? Okay, satellites, especially if they are of the optical range, they can measure certain properties of the upper soil layer. We have to be clear and honest on this. Normally, the measurements to measure soil organic carbon take samples in depth to various depths, like a column of soil, and they are taken into laboratories and dried out, weighted, and the percentages of organic matter against other components are evaluated. Okay, that is done in counted spots, and that's very useful. And we always need to rely on those field measurements by all means. But then that's expensive, that's time consuming, and the new legal frame also requires that the measurements are seamless and throughout Europe. So for that, we go to the satellite images, and with them we obtain some proxies, some approximation to some of the elements that work towards the organic component in the soil. Again, another point, and I'm aware that some of the audience today, number one, you might not be all acquainted with satellite sciences, but you're acquainted or you have needs in measuring soils. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see just some of the many stakeholders that we've engaged with throughout the project. And the same, they had very different needs and requirements. We gather all their requirements to see how we needed to provide this final product. Okay. Also, if you want, also I provide you here with a link so that you can go and see the full list of requirements. We concentrated in the soil organic carbon just because of the contract and with some of the specifications that we received from the stakeholders, but also we had a list that this year, 2025, we are going to start enlarging with some other products derived from satellites as well that were required by the users. So what's the system like, and what data, what components, and what measurements over which types of soils? Because again, soils are a continuum, but whoever has looked at a field on the spot, on the countryside, even in just one field, you can see the difference of the soil quality. And it's very different if we talk about arid soils or peatlands. The peatlands are like the jewel of the crown as far as the soil organic carbon matter concerns, while the behavior and the contents are very different, let's say in semi-arid soils in Southern Europe. So how did we handle all this? What are the components that are assembled here? And we looked at what we called forests, permanently covered soils, and bare soils with certain frequency. That would be the lands under different agricultural uses. So we use the soil reflectance composite. If at the beginning of the session today, we saw for those satellites that depend, that are optical and depend on the sun's light, we gather the soil reflectance composite. For that, we have specifically the Landsat images for past years, as well as the Sentinel missions that we have them every 5 days, and we have a huge amount of data sets. So we take it in a multi-temporal measurement. So for the bare soil prediction, we gather that soil reflectance, and for the vegetated soils, we use the bare soil frequency from the month of March till October. So we avoid those winter months, and the mean reflectance composite, and a full range, something like 30 environmental covariates. So environmental information that is linked to soil or vegetation to come into the equations. And for these algorithms, we handle two: one algorithm for bare soil and another one for vegetated soil. Afterwards are mosaiced, and the outcome comes in with two main factors: one, the topsoil content, as well as the uncertainty. And for this, we have the whole continuum at two different resolutions, at 50 meters and 50 meters for regional locations. And we have worked in 3 regions, which were the Walloon region in Belgium, the the Czech Republic, and Macedonia in Greece. And for that also, we've worked with the national reporting centers on soil to be able to check out and validate the results. And for the whole of Europe, the product is provided at 100 meter resolution. And here, okay, I will not go over the whole flow, but if we look at the sequence 1 to 7, again, that allows us to see the process and the data that we process step by step. So as input data, we have coverage of the different uses of the land cover. To be precise, is the world cover. We also ingest the Sentinel-2 data for over 3 years over Europe or over each one of the regions. We leverage on Lucas dataset, which is one of those sampling, in situ sampling datasets, which is, I mean, excellent. And this is a handicap that we don't have it worldwide. So always the standardization of data is cumbersome and is quite important. And also we ingest some meteorological data sets and from ERA, from other satellites, as well as the covariates, the environmental covariates that I mentioned before. So that goes to a sort of compositing. I will not go very much. And in number 3, I wanted to point at what we call the intermediate products, the intermediate results. And something that is very important is the bare soil mass and the bare soil frequency, because there we can see and spot the uses and the changes in the land use, and also the procedures that many of the agricultural practices are following. So that intermediate information is also being exploited. So in the modeling, number 4, in the modeling, as I mentioned, we are using artificial intelligence models to be able to ingest and process on the cloud all this information. So again, the key 2 intermediate products, the bare soil and the permanently vegetated soils. And in the post-processing, we aggregate and put them together, okay, because the land is a continuous. Sometimes is bare soil and sometimes is fully covered, but we need a continuum. And the final products, as I mentioned, are the soil organic carbon content prediction plus the uncertainties. And of course, the uncertainties are higher over vegetated areas. Why? Because we've been using a larger amount of proxies than direct measurements. So what are the products?
Yeah, sorry, just to,
yeah.
if you could
Speed
finish
up.
in a few minutes, then we
you.
can have some questions.
Yes.
We're starting to receive some questions in the chat as well.
Okay.
So, sorry.
So just as I mentioned, we have these 2 products, 100 meter and 50 meters, which for some of you who might be used to working on land, that goes to 1 hectare and 25, no, a quarter of a hectare. And we have been focusing on forests, croplands, and grasslands. And this is just a sample on the green colors are the prediction intervals of soil organic carbon. And in yellow are the uncertainties. So as you can see, for the agricultural areas, the uncertainties are much lower. So the prediction is better fit. And this is just the same sample for a particular site in which we notice how we are applying on top of it the properties. And we see how the borders of those properties also introduce some noise, but actually the prediction of the content of soil organic carbon is very well fit. And also I wanted to let you know that that there is a product description card with all these specifications. And when you go into the actual viewer, you will have the data pixel per pixel with all these contents. And just for this year 25, we are extending the areas beyond Europe to America, Africa, and Asia. And we are providing a new parameter, which is the sock to clay ratio model, just also because it's one of the key elements required by the European soil law. And carrying out again the production and the validation, and this will be handed over as well to the ESA system. And with this, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Julia, and thank you, everybody. There have been already many questions in the chat. We will get back to them, but first I wanted to introduce David Large, professor at the University of Nottingham, who is working mainly on the peatland topic and peatland topic, apologies, and the state of peatlands. So I wanted to know, I see that some of the questions are already relating to the peatlands because it is one of the, let's say, Eurosite's most expertise, let's say, topic. Many members are dealing with that really on the ground level. So maybe we can try to link a little bit the satellites now with the groundwork. Yeah, I was wondering maybe you could provide some reactions and why the state of peatlands is important and how much it is done with remote sensing. And yeah, maybe you can comment on the previous and on the relation to your work, if any.
I think what's been shown there, I think, raises quite an interesting, almost ethical dilemma as to how we approach this problem. So we have two methods. Now, I have no issue with the methods. They are what I would call, I don't mean to be derogatory, but they are bean counting methods. They determine the quantities and where they are. Now, that to me is not as useful as it should be. What we really want to understand is the potential for carbon storage in a given area under a given land use in a given climate, and whether or not we are realizing that potential. So the maps we want are not really maps of what's there now. It's maps of the deficit against what could be there if we were to choose to manage it in different ways. So I think it was interesting, in the last talk, there was a comment that said peatlands is the jewel in the crown. I actually don't think they are. Peatlands are fantastic. They're full of carbon. I love peatlands, but they accumulate carbon extremely slowly. And they never accumulate carbon faster than when they first start. At that initial point, at that point of initiation, they accumulate carbon far faster than they will ever accumulate in their entire lives. I think the jewel in the crown we have here is agricultural land, because there's far more of it, and we can change the carbon content of agricultural land very slightly, but over a far larger area by how we manage it, because we are effectively managing carbon in agricultural lands. In peatlands, the approach is somewhat different. So in peatlands, you can only restore a peatland that exists. You cannot restore a peatland that doesn't exist. Therefore, that gets rid of all the areas where peatland could be, but is no longer. And often it's replaced by agricultural land. So for all I have no issue with these techniques, I think philosophically, we should be looking at soil carbon potential. We should be trying to address the areas where that deficit between what is possible, and the same applies to forests. It's like, what could you put there in the way of forests? What can we do to address the deficits in areas where it is manageable, rather than thinking of simply mitigating losses where they happen to be happening now? So you know, that's my real thoughts on it. So no issues with the methods, but are we adopting the right philosophical approach to how we use these methods and how we deploy them in future attempts to restore carbon in the right places for the right purposes?
Thank you. Any direct reaction to this from your side, from the speakers, or we can also move on to the questions. There are a few, especially from indeed the around peatlands and to Julia. But maybe I'll start first with a question to Jukka. That so you mentioned that your methods are not so good at plot level. What is the cutoff in scale at which you would consider the results reliable? Because indeed we do have here more like the site managers, and you did mention that they're not that reliable, let's say not at the national level, but countries are different size. So what would be that?
Yeah, I totally see the point of the question, and I couldn't say it directly in the slides because there is no absolute cutoff point, unfortunately. It's very much dependent on case by case, depending on the structure of the forests and the available data, representativeness of the data sets, the reference data sets, and many issues. So, but I mean, there are like rules of thumbs, of course, that on the plot and stand level, typically it's not reliable at the moment. On a provincial or region level, like whole Catalonia, there I would already trust it. So in between, then it may vary depending on the case very much, unfortunately. And we are looking into this during this last year of the project. We have now study case in Norway where we look into this autocorrelation of the errors and particularly on the stand level, the accuracy, so that we could say something about the exactly on this, what is the small area that we cannot or can say something.
Maybe before we move on, a quick question to everybody. Would you be okay to stay for 5-10 more minutes so that we start addressing questions, because we can also continue doing that offline. But yeah, I'll then continue. Maybe another question, this one to Julia from Jean Rousselot. Could you sort out peatlands from the different soils of your maps? If yes, how did you deal with carbon stock and depth? So indeed, you did mention a little bit that that's not something that is possible, but maybe you did do some. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, apologies. Thank you for the question. And again, our world soils product does not deal with carbon stocks directly. There are some 3 other elements at least that we need to put into the equation. So we just provide, let's say, the first one is a sort of a prediction of carbon content, no carbon stock. Be careful, because there are 2 concepts different to handle. So, and then if you go into the viewer and you click and you know some locations of peatlands in northern Germany, in Finland, in Scotland, etc., you will spot them at once. Okay, they are super noticeable because of the high values of carbon content. So they are outstanding. Yeah.
And then one more is from having in mind greenhouse gas emissions, not only soil organic carbon is important, but also the current process ongoing in the soil profile. How would you identify degree of mineralization of peat integrated peatlands?
No, we don't come into that. We know, okay, there is a second very key important project. That's this Horizon 2020, which is called Monitoring, Reporting and Verification for Soil Organic Carbon. And that particular project is leveraging on our results, but going into this exchange of gases and in depth in the horizons. Yes, that's why I said at the beginning that this is a multi-factor process. So we need to really go step by step and say how far each one of the methods goes and what is not considered.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. David, there is a question to your philosophical, let's say, intervention as well. What farming method do you suggest would be best able to make good the deficit weather?
I would hesitate to recommend a method, but in the UK, the methods that have delivered the best increases, and by that I'm not talking about transforming your fields into peatlands, I'm talking about just increasing organic carbon content, and alongside that, hopefully reducing the demand for fertilisers are the no-till methods of farming, and ones that promote a greater biodiversity on land. So even in the uplands areas where they're farming sheep, for example, if they're managed for greater biodiversity, they tend to get slightly better soil carbon. But the main ones for arable appear to be no-till methods, but for me, the farmers are the ones that need to be telling us, what works best. You can see your soils, you can put a spade in the ground, you can see how dark the surface of the soil looks like. You can try different methods, you can share best practice amongst yourselves and see if you can make small gains in carbon. You own a lot of land, we depend on you for food, and we'd probably be great if you had to use less fertiliser, but all told, I think the best answer lies with you.
I am tempted here to see whether Bill Grayson, who asked the question and asked a follow-up question, how can I as a farmer make use of those tools? Maybe you want to interact by opening your microphone if you're available to maybe share your reactions and answer. I'm not sure that this answers your, and if you're available to comment.
Yes, thank you, Rita. Yeah, so this as a farmer, this is where we operate at, David. And in answer to your question about how to restore arable soils, as an organic farmer, the only way I can see this being done is to bring livestock back into the arable rotations. So it's not universally accepted because it's regarded by many as taking a step backwards. And the other issue with it, of course, is that the only livestock that can provide that service are ruminants, and ruminants, of course, have already been heavily criticised because of the enteric emissions they produce. So, working out how we can do this, to my way of thinking, is one of the crucial questions that we face, particularly if we're trying to combine climate restoration with nature restoration.
Yeah, I would not pretend to be an expert there, but I have read stuff that also says that the amount of emissions ruminants produce also depends on their diet and whether or not they're living off intensively grown grasses or whether they're living off more natural pasture. So I think there's a lot that can be done there, but we're looking for small gains over a large area. I think that's what matters. And any methods that can result in those small gains should be welcomed, and they should be appropriate to the different farmers and their own strategies and their desired crops and all the rest.
Clive, I see that you have your hand raised. You want to also?
Yes, just going back to the arable question, and I think there's a balance to be struck because I know that, as you say, the no-till approach is, being strongly recommended now. But if you take into the biodiversity side of these things, actually, if you stop tilling, the alternative is to glyphosate. So every year you glyphosate off the vegetation, and the only thing that's left is the crop. From a biodiversity perspective, if we're worried about pollinators and we're worried about the flora, this would be disastrous, absolutely disastrous from a biodiversity perspective. So I don't think the carbon stocks are the only thing we have to think about. You have to balance this against the implications for the other things, and that sadly they don't always neatly work together. So we have difficult decisions to make, basically. So I think where we do things and when we do things. I mean, at the moment, I think there's a really hard sell coming from the agrochemical industry and the agrochemical lobby to go down this line of what I'd call kill and drill, basically, and not ploughing. But like I say, if we do that, the implications of the biodiversity of the countryside very serious indeed.
Thanks, Clive. I'm afraid that we'll take one and a half, let's say, questions to Julia again, and then we'll have to wrap this up. One question is about, does the model handle the significant difference between the arable land and permanent grassland? Have you validated the result from this perspective? The question is reformulated. I can ask it on another way. Is the same model, same input in a single run is suitable to show the arable land and permanent grassland difference, or would it be better to have a separate product for the real natural extended BGs?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question, because really you just touched one of the critical points and one of the elements that is going to be refined during 2025. In fact, there is where we found how well the algorithms performed in Southern Europe or Central Northern Europe for different arable lands and different practices. And one of the results that we came across is how the prediction performance was much lower in Southern Europe, in Mediterranean croplands, also because the carbon content is lower naturally in these arid lands. However, because of the tree crops, permanently tree crops, which is the normal agricultural land, the results were very much distorted. So we recalculated and adjusted the algorithm, and still there is scope for improving it. And okay, we are going into that. So this is one of the weakest results. We are conscious of that. We are bound to improve it. Yes, you're right, totally right in your question, because that's what happens.
Thank you very much. And then maybe the very last question before which links very well to what will follow, is that do you think that the outcomes of the project will provide a sufficient tool to implement nature restoration law, particularly considering wetlands and peatlands? Julia, that's all, I guess, to you, but I think Jukka, you could also maybe comment on this one.
Okay. Nature restoration, as I think that Cliff mentioned it, or David, nature restoration is much more than providing a prediction of one factor. So the equation is much, much larger. So we just contribute with that. But we are aware that this cannot be used as the panacea. Is not the perfect solution, because it's just one factor of a very complex equation.
And Jukka, from your perspective of forest?
Yeah, I'm very much agree with Julia, actually. But I mean, overall, it needs to be remembered that what we do provide here in our project, at least, it's really just these products of the status of the current state. I mean, there is a big need, strong or large analysis needs to be then done with all kinds of other issues, how that affects to the restoration activities, or how the restoration is ongoing, or so on. And this actually, if I still have a little bit of time, I want to comment David's the first comment on this panel regarding this potential, for example, potential of the carbon and biomass. That is, yeah, indeed, it would be very interesting, and I would be surprised if that kind of maps doesn't exist, like the carbon potential or other like biomass potential on different areas. I assume it could be quite nicely or easily estimated with taking into consideration the ecosystems and the climatic conditions and overall. And it would be very interesting to then compare that kind of map with existing carbon stock maps to see where are those areas where we could focus.
Thank you,
I would
Jukka.
be happy to cooperate in that kind of study.
Great. Thanks really again, everybody, and thanks for staying a little bit longer. We will wrap up now. So why as well the nature restoration law question was a good. We have started to collaborate with Eurosite on an upcoming webinar in January, EU for nature restoration law. So whoever is interested, do not hesitate to express your interest, and also stay tuned to our channels and also to the channels of Eurosite. We have been tracking the questions that were not answered, and we'll share them with the speakers in case they could provide maybe written answers after the webinar. Thanks again, everybody, for this. We will continue to follow up and dig into the topic in the future, thanks to our collaboration with Eurosite. And again, a great change of perspectives, which is very enriching. Thanks to this collaboration. Thank you very much. And have a nice afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.